I always believed I knew the human heart after living for more than 5 decades. I was wrong. I only understood true betrayal when I heard my own son plotting to discard me while his 5-year-old son cried for me in the hallway. Treachery does not come from enemies, but from the child you raised. He thinks I am broken, but he is about to learn that a quiet woman is the most dangerous force of all. My name is Martha Ellington. For over 10 years, since the day my husband lowered his head for the last time, I have walked this earth as a widow. I thought I understood the shape of loneliness, but I had never truly known isolation until I woke up in that recovery room. The air smelled of antiseptic and stale coffee. My body felt like it had been poured full of lead, a lingering souvenir from the mild stroke that had swept my legs out from under me just 2 days prior. My left arm was numb, a dead weight by my side, and my tongue felt too thick for my mouth. But my ears were working perfectly. I kept my eyes closed. It was an instinct, a momentary desire to delay the reality of the bright hospital lights, but it quickly became my only defense. Just to the right of my bed, voices were cutting through the rhythmic hum of the medical machines. I recognized the nervous, shifting stance of my son, Joel, and the sharp, impatient tone of his wife, Marissa. We decided she leaves. The sentence hung in the air, cold and detached. Marissa said it not with sorrow, but with the efficient calculation of a project manager dealing with a redundancy. I felt a jolt of panic, but I forced my breathing to remain shallow and even. I could not let them know I was awake. From the hallway, the muffled, hiccuping sobs of a child drifted in. It was Oliver. My grandson was only 5 years old, and he was crying for me. I wanted to scream, to rush to him and comfort him, but I was trapped in this uncooperative body. Joel muttered something about the doctors saying I might recover, his voice trembling with that familiar indecision I had tried so hard to correct in his youth. Marissa cut him off instantly. She spoke of a facility called Shady Acres, a place I knew by reputation as a dumping ground for the indigent and the forgotten. She spoke of the monthly savings, and then she spoke of the house, my house, the home my husband and I had built brick by brick, paid for with 30 years of sweat and sacrifice. Marissa was talking about title transfers and power of attorney. She was talking about how quickly the market was moving and how the equity could solve their problems. The realization settled over me like a shroud. They were not planning my recovery. They were planning my removal. I was an obstacle standing between them and a payout. The pain of the stroke was nothing compared to the agonizing knife twisting in my chest. This was the boy I had nursed through fevers, the man I had helped through college, standing there while his wife plotted to bury me alive in a cheap nursing home so they could cash in my life's work. I felt a tear slide from the corner of my eye, hot and stinging. But I did not move. I would not give them the satisfaction. They thought I was a frail old woman, broken by a medical event. They had forgotten who I was before I was just a grandmother. I was Martha Ellington. For 20 years. I was a financial supervisor at Northbridge Systems. I did not bake cookies for a living. I hunted down discrepancies. I managed audits that made grown men sweat. I knew how to look at a chaotic ledger and find the single thread of deceit that unraveled the whole lie. I had been tough, precise, and unyielding. The atmosphere in the room was heavy, suffocating with their greed. Marissa continued to whisper plans to Joel, assuming the woman in the bed was finished. But as I lay there, listening to the betrayal of my own blood, the fear began to recede, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. The stroke may have slowed my body, but my mind was sharpening by the second. I was not going anywhere. I was going to stay right here, and I was going to watch them. Over the next 3 days, I perfected the art of invisibility. I learned quickly that people become careless around the sick because they assume a paralyzed limb equals a paralyzed mind. I let my eyelids droop heavy. I slowed my breathing to a rhythmic, shallow drag. I became a piece of furniture in my own hospital room. And just as I had anticipated, the secrets began to spill out like oil from a leaking drum. The first revelation came from Joel. He was pacing by the window while thinking I was asleep. He was whispering into his cell phone. But desperation has a way of raising a man's volume. I heard him mention a figure that made my blood run cold: $250,000. It was not just a failed investment, as he had hinted at Christmas. It was a catastrophe. He had leveraged his own future, and now the creditors were circling. He needed liquid assets fast, and I was the only asset he had left. Then came Marissa. She did not even bother to step outside into the hallway. She stood right at the foot of my bed, tapping away on her tablet with aggressive precision. She was on a call with a woman named Brenda. I recognized the name from the heavy yard signs that littered our neighborhood. A real estate agent. Marissa was discussing closing dates. She was asking about expedited title transfers. She told this Brenda that the owner was incapacitated and that power of attorney was imminent. She was selling my home before my body was even cold. The hardest part was not the anger. It was Oliver. They brought him in on Tuesday evening. He looked so small in the sterile room. He climbed onto the chair and held my good hand. He whispered that he did not want Mommy to take me away. He said Mommy told him I was going to a special place to sleep. His tears soaked into the bedsheet. It took every ounce of my will not to squeeze his hand back and tell him I was fighting. I had to remain limp. I had to let them believe they had won so that I could secure his future. When night fell and the nurse's station quieted down, I made my move. My handbag had been shoved into the bottom of the narrow closet. It took me 10 minutes to drag myself upright, and another 10 to reach the bag with my good arm. Inside, tucked in a zipped lining, was my emergency phone. It was an old habit from my days at Northbridge Systems. Always have a backup line. Always have an exit strategy. I dialed a number I had memorized 20 years ago. Vivian Cross picked up on the second ring. She was retired now, but her mind was as sharp as a diamond cutter. I kept my voice low, a rasping whisper. I told her everything. I told her about the conversation regarding Shady Acres. I told her about the debt. Vivian did not offer sympathy. She offered strategy. She reminded me of Henry's will. We had included a specific clause, the homestead protection, which meant the house could not be sold without my direct, lucid consent, regardless of medical power of attorney, unless 2 independent physicians declared me permanently incompetent. Joel and Marissa were trying to bypass this by moving me out first. Once I was in the facility, they would claim abandonment or medical necessity to trigger a loophole. It is a classic maneuver, Vivian said. Her voice was steel. They move you temporarily. Then they lease the house. Then they sell it to cover the care costs. But really, they pocket the equity. It is structured coercion. I asked her to check my secondary checking account, the one I had given Joel access to for groceries and utilities. She logged in remotely while we stayed on the line. Silence stretched between us for a long moment. When she spoke again, her tone had shifted from lawyer to prosecutor. There were checks, 3 of them, all dated within the last week, all signed with my name. But I had been in a coma for 2 of those days. Marissa had practiced my signature. I could see it in my mind, the way she used to watch me sign birthday cards. She was not just aggressive, she was criminal. Vivian told me to get out. I told her not yet. I was an auditor. An auditor does not walk into a meeting without the full paper trail. I needed to record them. I needed them to admit it on tape. I needed to prove that my son was not just a victim of circumstance, but an accomplice to fraud. I hung up the phone and hid it beneath my mattress. The grief was gone now. All that was left was the cold, calculating hum of the investigation. The hospital room, once a place of recovery, had transformed into a holding cell. By Wednesday morning, the air shifted from clinical to conspiratorial. A case manager named Susan entered with a clipboard and a practiced smile that did not reach her eyes. She spoke about a facility called Clear Pines Residence. She used words like optimal care and round-the-clock monitoring. But I knew the place. It was an hour away, isolated, and notorious for being understaffed. It was a warehouse for the unwanted. Joel stood by the window, unable to look at me. He looked like a man drowning in his own skin. He held my hand for a moment, his palm damp with sweat. "Mum, it is just for a little while," he said. His voice cracked. "We just want you to be safe." I saw the guilt eating at him, but I also saw his spine bend under Marissa's glare. She stood by the door, arms crossed, tapping her foot. She was not asking me to go. She was waiting for the logistics to clear so she could ship me out. They thrust a transfer form in front of me. The pen hovered. My hand trembled, not entirely from the stroke this time, but from rage. Under the sheets. My fingers brushed against the cold metal of my burner phone. I had checked it minutes earlier while they were arguing in the hallway. A single text message from Vivian glowed on the screen. "Do not sign. Watch." I let the pen drop. I let my jaw go slack and my eyes drift unfocused toward the ceiling. I murmured Henry's name, calling out for my dead husband. It was a performance I never thought I would have to give, playing the part of the senile, confused widow. It worked. Marissa let out a huff of annoyance and snatched the clipboard away. "He is not coming. Martha!" she snapped. She turned to Joel. "She is losing it. We need to expedite this." They moved to the corner of the room, assuming my mind had drifted away with my gaze. I slid my hand under the pillow, found the record button on the phone, and prayed the red light would not show through the fabric. I recorded it all. Marissa listed the timeline. They would move me to Clear Pines on Thursday morning. By Friday, she would have the power of attorney activated to list the house. She laughed about how easy it was to convince the doctor that I was cognitively declining. Joel tried to protest about the speed of it, but she silenced him with a hiss about the creditors knocking on their door. The sun began to set, casting long, prison bar shadows across the floor. A young nurse named Nora came in to check my vitals. She was different from the others. She had kind eyes and gentle hands. As she adjusted my IV, she leaned in close. "Your son signed the temporary custody papers an hour ago," she whispered. "They are moving you at 6 in the morning." The trap had snapped shut. If I stayed until sunrise, I would be lost in the system. I would be medicated, isolated, and silenced. I looked at Nora. I dropped the act. I looked her dead in the eye with the intensity I used to reserve for tax auditors. "I am not confused. Nora, I said, my voice steady and low. They are stealing my life. I need to leave. Now. Nora hesitated. She looked at the door, then back at me. She saw the bruises on my spirit, the clarity in my gaze. She nodded once. I told Joel and Marissa I was exhausted and needed to sleep. I waited until their footsteps faded down the hall. Nora returned 10 minutes later with a wheelchair. She had misplaced my discharge paperwork on the night desk, creating a distraction. The pain in my leg was excruciating as I transferred from the bed to the chair, but I bit my lip until it bled. I would not make a sound. Nora wheeled me through the service elevator, avoiding the main nurses' station. The hum of the hospital faded, replaced by the cool, sharp air of the parking garage. A taxi was waiting where she said it would be. I gripped Nora's hand, pressing a $20 bill I had stashed in my phone case into her palm, not as payment, but as a promise. I climbed into the back seat, my body aching, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. As the car pulled away, I looked up at the third-floor window. The lights were off. They thought I was sleeping. They thought they had won. Drive. I told the driver. Just drive. The taxi dropped me off at Vivian's driveway at 2 a.m. The suburban street was dead silent, the kind of silence that usually brought me peace. But tonight it felt heavy with the threat of what I had left behind. I paid the driver with the last cash I had on hand and watched him disappear around the bend before I dared to ring the doorbell. When Vivian opened the door, her face went pale. She tightened her robe around herself, staring at my wheelchair, my slumped shoulder, and the hospital bracelet still strapped to my wrist. She did not ask questions. She simply unlocked the screen door and pulled me into the warmth of her hallway. I had not realized how cold I was until the heat of her house hit my skin, and I started shaking uncontrollably. We did not sleep. We sat at her kitchen table with a pot of strong tea. I played the recordings I had captured on my phone. The audio was crisp. Marissa's voice cut through the quiet kitchen, discussing the sale of my home and my transfer to the nursing facility with cold, bureaucratic detachment. Joel's voice was softer, pathetic, agreeing to everything she demanded. Vivian listened with her eyes closed, her jaw set hard. When the recording finished, she looked at me. "This is not just ungrateful," she said. "This is evidence of conspiracy to commit fraud and elder abuse." While I warmed my hands on the mug, Vivian opened her laptop and used her old credentials to access the banking portal we had set up years ago. I saw her eyes widen. She turned the screen toward me. There was a transfer initiated yesterday at 4 p.m. Joel had moved $15,000 from my emergency savings into a joint account he shared with Marissa. He had used the temporary access code I gave him for groceries to drain the nest egg I had kept for my funeral. "Block it," I told her. Vivian was already typing. She flagged the transaction as unauthorized and put a freeze on all 3 of my accounts. The bank would call Joel in the morning to demand an explanation, and the panic that would cause gave me a grim sense of satisfaction. But the victory was short-lived. I pulled out my tablet to check the security feed from my front door. The system was still active, a digital window into the home I was supposed to have abandoned. The screen flickered to life in black and white night vision. My heart stopped. Marissa was on the front lawn. It was 3 a.m. Yet there she was, hauling boxes out the front door. I zoomed in. It was my china. It was the collection of porcelain figures Henry had bought me in Europe. She was not packing them. She was dumping them into the large recycling bin by the curb like they were garbage. Then, the motion sensor light triggered. The front door swung open again, and a small figure ran out in pajamas. It was Oliver. He was barefoot on the cold concrete. Even without audio, I could see his mouth open in a scream. He was pointing at the driveway, looking for my car. He was looking for me. Marissa grabbed his arm. She did not hug him. She yanked him back with such force that his feet left the ground. She dragged him back inside and slammed the door. The feed went still. I dropped the tablet on the table. A sound escaped my throat. A raw, wounded noise that I could not hold back. Tears streamed down my face, hot and fast. This was not about money anymore. It was not about the house. It was about a 5-year-old boy being raised by a monster who treated people like disposable assets. I will not let her destroy him, I whispered. I wiped my face with the back of my good hand. Vivian reached across the table and gripped my wrist. She told me she knew someone. His name was Lionel Hart, a social inspector she had worked with on a guardianship case 5 years ago. She said he hated bullies, and he had the authority to intervene if we could prove the environment was unsafe. Call him, I said. I looked at the frozen image of my empty front porch on the screen. Call him now. I am done hiding. It is time to hunt. The meeting with Inspector Lionel Hart took place in Vivian's sunroom, just as the sun was beginning to break over the horizon. Lionel was a man who carried silence like a weapon. He did not interrupt. He sat with a heavy stillness, listening to the recordings of my son and daughter-in-law discussing my disposal. When the audio ended, he did not offer empty platitudes. He simply opened a folder he had brought with him. He told me that he had run a preliminary check on the names Vivian provided. It turned out that my daughter-in-law was not a stranger to the legal system. Lionel suspected a pattern. He had seen names associated with Marissa Surface in 2 previous inquiries regarding coerced inheritance disputes in a neighboring county, though nothing had stuck. She knew how to walk the line between aggressive persuasion and criminal coercion. But it was my son, Joel, who provided the smoking gun. Lionel confirmed what I had feared, but hoped wasn't true. Joel was not just struggling, he was drowning. There was a civil judgment against him from 3 years ago for minor contract fraud that he had kept hidden from me. He owed over $80,000 to private lenders, the kind who did not send polite letters. The desperation I had heard in his voice at the hospital was not concern for my health. It was the terror of a man who had promised money he did not have, using my home as the collateral. I handed over the digital evidence of the title transfer attempts. Lionel looked at the timestamps. He noted that they were trying to push the paperwork through while I was medically sedated. That crosses the line, he said. That is not just unethical. It is predatory. He officially opened a silent investigation right then and there. He wanted to catch them in the act of finalizing the fraud. While we were strategizing, chaos was erupting back at the hospital. Through a contact of Vivian's who worked at the nurses' station, we learned that Joel and Marissa had arrived at 6 a.m. to oversee my transfer to Clear Pines. When they found the empty bed, they did not call the police immediately. They panicked. They spent an hour frantically calling my cell phone, which I had turned off, and searching the hospital grounds. They were terrified that if I was lucid and free, their entire house of cards would collapse. So they did the only thing cowards know how to do. They doubled down on the lie. Marissa forced Joel to go to the precinct. They filed a missing persons report. But they spun a narrative that made my blood boil. They told the officers that I was suffering from severe post-stroke dementia. that I was confused, aggressive, and a danger to myself. They claimed I had wandered off in a delirium. It was a calculated move to invalidate anything I might say if I was found. If I spoke about the theft, they could dismiss it as the ramblings of a sick old woman. Lionel received the alert on his dispatch radio. He looked at me, sitting calmly with my tea, sharp as a tack. He shook his head with a dark grimace. "They are digging their own grave," he muttered. The final straw came at noon. I turned on the local news and saw my own face staring back at me. It was a photo from my 50th birthday, but the caption underneath read, "Elderly woman missing. Confused and vulnerable. Family pleads for safe return." I watched Joel on the screen, standing in front of the hospital, looking devastatingly sad. He pleaded for anyone who saw me to call the police, claiming he just wanted his mum home. Beside him, Marissa dabbed at dry eyes with a tissue, playing the distraught daughter-in-law to perfection. The audacity of it took my breath away. They were using the public's sympathy to hunt me down so they could lock me away. They thought they controlled the narrative. They thought I was watching this from a park bench, shivering and scared. I stood up, ignoring the ache in my leg. I looked at Lionel and Vivian. They think I am a confused old lady who needs to be saved. I said, "Let us show them exactly how lucid I am. It is time to go on the record. We did not sit idle while the police searched for the phantom version of me that Joel and Marissa had invented, while they were playing the part of the grieving family for the cameras. Vivian and I were constructing a fortress of legal paper. We spent the morning with a notary who came to the house. I sat straight-backed in Vivian's dining room and recorded a sworn affidavit. I stated clearly that I was of sound mind, that I had left of my own volition, and that I was fearful of financial and emotional extortion by my son and his wife. Once the statement was notarized, we fired the first warning shot. Vivian drafted a formal cease and desist letter. It was not a sentimental plea from a mother. It was a cold, hard legal document demanding they stop all attempts to access my accounts, halt any contact with my real estate assets, and cease the dissemination of false information regarding my medical status. We had it couriered to my front door within 2 hours. I watched the delivery happen in real time on my tablet. The camera in the foyer had a wide angle, and the audio was perfect. Marissa tore open the envelope standing right in the hallway. Her face turned a shade of violet I had never seen before. She threw the papers onto the side table and screamed that this was a dirty trick. She paced the floor, ranting that I was manipulating the system, completely blind to the irony that she had tried to institutionalize me just 24 hours prior. Joel stood in the doorway, looking like a ghost. He picked up the letter and read the warning about potential fraud charges. I saw him hesitate. For a second, I thought he might wake up and realize he was committing a crime against his own mother. But then he mentioned the loan sharks. He mentioned the deadline for his debt payment, which was only 48 hours away. Fear won out over morality. He crumbled and agreed with Marissa that they had to fight me. He chose his debt over his dignity. That was the moment I decided to stop pulling my punches. I picked up the phone and called Samuel Lawson. Samuel and I had worked side by side at Northbridge Systems for 15 years. He was an internal investigator who could find a single missing cent in $1 million ledger. I told him I needed a background check on Marissa, and I needed it deep. Samuel called back in less than 3 hours. He had found a thread and pulled it until the whole sweater unraveled. It turned out Marissa had a history of this. Samuel found records from Nevada linking her to an unlicensed real estate brokerage scheme. She had been fined, but she had managed to keep her name off the criminal docket by settling out of court. She was not just a bad daughter-in-law. She was a professional grifter who moved from state to state when things got too hot. While Samuel was digging into her past, I was gathering ammunition from the present. I switched the camera feed to the living room. The old motion sensors I had installed years ago were still active, blinking silently in the corners of the ceiling. Marissa had no idea they were recording. What I saw broke my heart, but it gave me exactly what I needed. Oliver was sitting on the rug, holding a toy car. He looked up at his mother and asked if he could have some juice. Marissa did not even look at him. She was on the phone, screaming at a bank representative about the freeze I had put on the accounts. When Oliver tugged on her pant leg, she snapped. She yelled at him to get away from her and told him that he was being a nuisance. She left him crying on the floor while she stormed into the kitchen to pour herself a glass of wine. It was not physical violence, but it was distinct, documented neglect. It was proof that the environment was volatile and that the adults in the house were too consumed by their failing criminal schemes to care for a child. I exported the video file. I combined it with Samuel's report on Marissa's Nevada fraud and the audio recordings of their plot to sell my house. I sent the entire encrypted package to Inspector Lionel Hart. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Lionel. It was short, professional, and devastating for Joel and Marissa. He said he had enough. He was officially upgrading the inquiry to a criminal investigation for elder abuse and fraud. The game of cat and mouse was over. Now, the law was coming for them. Marissa did not surrender easily. She was a fighter, the kind who threw sand in your eyes when she was losing. 2 days after Lionel opened his file, I was served with a court order for an emergency psychiatric evaluation. Marissa had sworn under oath that my departure from the hospital was the result of a psychotic break and that I had a history of emotional violence toward her and Oliver. It was a desperate fabrication intended to discredit my affidavit and force me back under her control. I walked into the office of Dr. Aris Thorne with my head held high. I did not tremble. For 45 minutes, he tested my memory, my logic, and my emotional stability. I recited the closing values of the stock market from the day before. I detailed the timeline of my medical treatment with the precision of a surgeon. I explained the legal definition of power of attorney abuse. By the end of the hour, Dr. Thorne put down his pen. He looked at me and said that I was not only competent, but sharper than most people half my age. He noted in his official report that the petitioner, meaning Marissa, appeared to have grossly exaggerated the claims. Her weapon had backfired. Instead of proving I was crazy, she had given an independent expert reason to doubt her credibility. That evening, Joel called. He begged to see me. Against Vivian's advice, I agreed. I needed to look him in the eye one last time before the legal hammer came down. He came to Vivian's house alone. He looked 10 years older than he had the week prior. He sat on the edge of the sofa, wringing his hands until his knuckles turned white. He started to cry. It was a pathetic, weeping sound that used to break my heart when he was a boy. But now it just sounded like cowardice. He told me he was trapped. He said Marissa was just trying to save their family and that the debt was crushing them. He asked me to have mercy. He asked me to just let the house sale go through so they could start over. And then, in his rambling attempt to justify himself, he let the ugly truth slip out. He said they were planning to move to Arizona. He said that once the house was sold and I was settled at Clear Pines, They would head west to buy a new property. The words hung in the air like smoke. Settled. That was his word for abandoned. They were never coming back to visit me. They were going to dump me in a facility, sell my life's work, and run to another state with my money. I did not scream. I simply touched the pocket of my cardigan where my recorder was humming silently. I asked him to repeat it, just to be sure I understood. He did. He laid out the whole exit strategy, confirming that my institutionalization was never meant to be temporary. When he left, he thought he had made a breakthrough. He thought I was considering his plea. But 20 minutes later, Marissa found out that I was still proceeding with the legal action. She must have realized Joel had failed to manipulate me. She arrived at Vivian's house like a hurricane. She pounded on the front door, screaming that I was a vindictive witch. She yelled that I was ruining her life and that I never loved Joel. It was a spectacle of pure, unfiltered rage. She did not know that Samuel Lawson was parked across the street in a nondescript sedan with tinted windows. His long lens camera captured every second of her aggression. He recorded her threats. He recorded her kicking Vivian's front gate. Vivian opened the door, not with fear, but with a calm, terrifying authority. She stood behind the screen door and held up a small black flash drive. She told Marissa that everything, the fraud, the negligence with Oliver, the attempt to force the house sale, and now this harassment was on that drive. She told her that if she did not get off the property in 10 seconds, the drive would be delivered directly to the district attorney. For the first time, I saw the color drain from Marissa's face. The arrogance vanished, replaced by the hollow look of a trapped animal. She looked at Joel, who was cowering by the car, and then back at Vivian. She realized the game was rigged, and she was not the one holding the cards anymore. She retreated to the car without a word. As they drove away, I knew the fear had finally taken root. They were no longer fighting for the money. They were fighting for their freedom. The legal machinery began to turn, and it was not the slow, grinding gear I expected. It was a guillotine. Inspector Lionel Hart did not just file a report. He presented a dossier that was thick with evidence. He formally requested a grand jury investigation into Marissa for elder abuse, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit theft. The accusation was no longer a family spat. It was a felony. Joel was the first to feel the heat. He was summoned to provide a deposition regarding the attempted transfer of the property deed. I was told he sat in the small interview room for 4 hours. They presented him with the digital logs showing the document access times, which aligned perfectly with the hours I was unconscious in the ICU. He stuttered. He sweated. He tried to say he was acting in my best interest. But the timestamp does not lie. You do not sell a woman's house while she is fighting for her life, unless you are afraid she will survive to stop you. Then came the knock that terrified Marissa the most. Child Protective Services arrived on a Tuesday morning. Based on the video evidence of neglect and the unstable domestic environment, they opened a case file for Oliver. Because I had been cleared by Dr. Thorne as mentally competent and physically stable, I was granted temporary supervised visitation rights immediately. When I saw him at the agency office, my heart broke and healed all at once. He looked thinner. He was clutching that same toy car. When he saw me, he did not just run. He launched himself into my arms. He buried his face in my neck and sobbed, shaking with a relief that a 5-year-old boy should never have to feel. He asked if the bad lady was going to take me away again. He meant his mother. I held him tight and promised him that nobody was taking anyone anywhere ever again. The court of public opinion is often faster than the court of law. The local newspaper picked up on the police blotter. The headline shifted from missing elderly woman to local couple investigated for defrauding stroke victim. The shame was instant. The neighbours who had previously offered Marissa casseroles and sympathy now crossed the street to avoid her. Marissa tried to stop the bleeding. Her lawyer, a slick man with an expensive suit and a cheap smile, contacted Vivian. He proposed a settlement. He said that if I dropped the charges and signed a non-disclosure agreement, Marissa would agree to move out and leave Oliver with Joel. It was a bribe wrapped in legalese. I looked at Vivian. "Tell him no," I said. "Tell him I do not want a deal. I want justice." The fallout hit Joel by Friday. His employer, a mid-sized logistics firm, did not want the bad press associated with an employee accused of robbing his own mother. They fired him for violation of the morality clause in his contract. He called me, not to apologize, but to scream that I had ruined his career. I hung up on him. He had ruined his own career the moment he valued a quick payout over his mother's life. The pressure cracked the alliance between them. Through Samuel's surveillance, we learned that the house had become a war zone. Marissa was no longer the cool, calculating planner. She was vicious. She blamed Joel for being weak. She screamed that if he had just managed me better, none of this would have happened. She took no responsibility. She threw him to the wolves to save her own skin. But Lionel had one final nail for the coffin. He had completed the forensic audit of the $15,000 Joel had stolen. It was not used for bills. It was not used for Oliver. It had been wired directly to an offshore sports betting account registered under a shell name. It was grand larceny, plain and simple. The pieces were all there. The motive was gambling debt. The method was fraud. The victim was a vulnerable senior citizen. As I looked at the pile of evidence on Lionel's desk, I realized that I was no longer just fighting for my house. I was preparing to send my son and his wife to prison. The hearing took place on a Tuesday morning, and the room was packed. It was technically a session to determine the permanent guardianship of Oliver and to address the restraining orders. But the atmosphere felt more like a public execution of a reputation. The local press had filled the back 2 rows, their pens scratching against notepads like the sound of dry leaves. The community had turned out in force, fueled by the headlines of the past week. They wanted to see the monster who would sell her own mother. I did not enter the courtroom in a wheelchair. I walked in on my own 2 feet. I wore my best navy suit, the one I used to wear for boardroom audits at Northbridge Systems. I held my head high, my eyes clear and sharp. When I passed Joel and Marissa at the defendant's table, I did not look away. I looked right through them. Joel looked like a man who had not slept in a week, his skin grey and pasty. Marissa sat rigid, her face a mask of indignation, still believing she could talk her way out of this. My lawyer, Vivian, and Inspector Lionel Hart stood beside me as I took the stand. I did not need notes. I told the story of the last 10 days with surgical precision. I described the stroke. I described the paralysis. And then, I described the conversation I heard when they thought I was brain dead. Marissa's lawyer tried to object, claiming hearsay. That was when Vivian stood up. "We have more than testimony." "Your Honor," she said, "we have documentation." The courtroom went silent as the audio played over the speakers. Marissa's voice, cold and sharp, filled the room. We decided she leaves. The sentence hung in the air, stripping away every lie she had told the press about caring for me. Then came the video. The screen showed my front porch at 3 in the morning. It showed Marissa dumping my husband's heirlooms into the trash. It showed Oliver, small and terrified, running out in his pajamas, screaming for his grandmother. It showed Marissa dragging him back inside like a sack of flour. A collective gasp swept through the gallery. A woman in the front row covered her mouth. The judge, a stern man named Justice Halloway, looked from the screen to Marissa with an expression of pure disgust. The facade crumbled. Joel was the first to break. He slumped forward, burying his face in his hands. He began to sob, a loud, ugly sound that echoed off the high ceilings. "I am sorry. Mom," he wailed. "I am sorry. I was just so scared of the debt." He confessed right there. He admitted to the gambling. He admitted to the plan to sell the house. He begged me to look at him, to forgive him. But the room remained cold. His tears were not for what he had done to me. They were for what was happening to him. Marissa did not cry. She stood up, her eyes wild. "It is not my fault." She screamed, pointing a finger at Joel. "He told me we had no money. The hospital said she was never going to recover. The system forced us to do this." She looked around the room, seeking an ally, but found only stone faces. She blamed the doctors for misdiagnosing me. She blamed Joel for being a weak provider. She even tried to blame me for being a burden. Justice Halloway banged his gavel, silencing her tirade. The sound was like a gunshot. Based on the overwhelming evidence presented here today, the judge said, his voice booming, "I am recommending the immediate filing of felony charges against Marissa Ellington for elder abuse, fraud, and child endangerment." Marissa gasped, finally realizing that her words had no power here. 2 officers stepped forward to escort her out. She looked at me one last time, not with remorse, but with hatred. I held her gaze until she was forced to turn away. The judge turned to Joel. He stated that while Joel's cooperation and confession would be taken into account, he was to be stripped of all power of attorney immediately. A permanent restraining order was issued preventing him from coming within 500 feet of my assets or my person without express permission. Then came the ruling that mattered most. The judge looked at the file concerning Oliver. He granted temporary custody to the state, but ordered immediate, unsupervised visitation rights for me, with a track to full guardianship pending a home evaluation. I looked back at the gallery. The anger in the room had shifted to relief. The truth was out. The lies were dead. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the last week lift off my shoulders. I had lost a son. I knew that. But as I looked at the empty chair where Marissa had sat, I knew I had saved my grandson, and that was a victory worth every scar. 3 weeks after the gavel fell, I pounded a for sale sign into the front lawn of the house on Maple Street. I did it with my own 2 hands. This time, the sale was not a frantic act of liquidation to cover a gambling debt, nor was it a scheme hatched in the shadows while I lay in a hospital bed. It was my decision. I dictated the terms. I chose the closing date. I signed the papers with a steady hand, knowing that the equity belonged to me and only me. I moved 2 hours south to a small, weathered cottage in Seabrook County. It is nothing like the sprawling suburban colonial I left behind. It smells of salt and cedar, and the floorboards creak when the wind blows off the ocean. But for the first time in years, the air inside feels clean. It is a sanctuary I bought with my own money, a place where no one is waiting for me to die so they can cash out. The best part of the new house is the guest room. I painted it a bright, cheerful yellow, specifically for Oliver. The court granted me regular weekend visitation, and those 2 days are the anchor of my week. When he first came here, he was quiet, still checking the corners of the room as if expecting his mother to burst in and drag him away. But the ocean has a way of healing wounds. We build sandcastles near the tide line. We eat ice cream on the porch. Last Saturday, for the first time in months, I heard him laugh, a real belly-shaking laugh that sounded like music. We are rebuilding our family, one weekend at a time. Vivian and Samuel drove down for a small housewarming dinner last month. There were no files to review, no recordings to analyze, and no legal strategies to plot. We sat on the back deck, watching the sun dip below the water, drinking wine and talking about everything except the trial. Samuel toasted to justice. Vivian toasted to freedom. I looked at them. These two people who had stood by me when my own blood had turned against me, and I realized that loyalty is not inherited. It is chosen. Joel came to see me only once. He drove down on a Tuesday afternoon when the sky was grey and heavy with rain. He did not come inside. We stood on the porch, separated by the railing. He looked thinner, and the arrogance that had defined him for so long was gone, replaced by a weary, hollowed-out shame. He did not ask for money. He did not ask for forgiveness. He simply told me that he had found a job in a warehouse and was attending counseling for his addiction. "I am going to fix this. Mum," he said. His voice was low, barely audible over the sound of the waves. I looked at him, the boy I had raised, the man who had betrayed me. The anger was gone, but the trust was gone too, and we both knew it would never fully return. "You cannot fix what is broken, Joel," I told him softly. "You can only build something new. You need to save yourself." He nodded, tears welling in his eyes, and then he turned and walked back to his car. I watched him drive away until his taillights disappeared into the mist. As for Marissa, justice was absolute. She was convicted on 2 counts of fraud. She lost her real estate license permanently and was ordered to pay restitution. The last I heard, she had moved 2 states away, living under her maiden name, trying to outrun a reputation that would follow her forever. She is no longer my problem. Yesterday, I received a letter in the mail from Inspector Lionel Hart. It was not official business. It was a handwritten note thanking me. He wrote that because of the publicity surrounding my case. 3 other elderly victims in the district had come forward to report financial abuse by their relatives. He said that by standing up, I had given them the courage to speak. I folded the letter and walked out to the edge of the water. The tide was coming in, washing away the footprints in the sand. I used to think revenge was about destruction. I thought it was about making them hurt the way they hurt me. I was wrong. As I stood there, breathing in the cold, salty air, I realized that the ultimate revenge was not their downfall. It was my survival. It was the fact that I was standing here, healthy and whole, watching my grandson grow up, living a life that was entirely my own. They wanted to erase me. Instead, I wrote a new chapter. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It was a difficult journey to share, but I believe these things need to be spoken out loud. I would love to know where you are listening from today. So please drop a comment down below and let's share our thoughts with each other. If you enjoyed this story and want to support the channel, please make sure to subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary, hit that like button, and smash the hype button so this story can reach even more people who might need to hear it. Stay strong, everyone.